right. Getting this all settled. Now, get this hooked in. Hello everybody. I'm going to let a few minutes go by to let some people log in. And if things go weird, I'm hotspotting off of my phone because my internet is a little weird, so I may not be able to see your questions if my computer goes belly up. So what I'll do is if I lose questions at the end, I will go back and scroll and I'll answer them. So I hope to not have to do that, but we'll see how it goes. Earlier it was a little wonky. Hello, Tracy. Hello from Oregon. You're a bit south for me. I'm up in the Seattle area. Lansing, Michigan. Wow, cool. Hi, Tammy. I'm going to give it another, say 30 seconds to a minute before I get started. And let people get in and logged on and stuff, so. Canada, fun. Hello, Jacqueline. Utah, Julie. All right. Let's see. I guess we can start a little bit here. Who am I? My name is Andrea Wolf, and I graduated from Scripps College in Claremont, California in ceramics. So I've been kind of doing this off and on for a long time, and I really, really, really enjoy mixing glazes. And I know there's been a lot of questions in the group lately about how to get started. Oh, where do I start? What recipes and what, oh my gosh, it's just a lot. And I'm hoping today that after I walk you through things with equipment and materials and stuff that you guys have a little more confidence in mixing your own glazes. But yeah, I'm going to walk you through mixing your own glaze from start to finish, and then talk a bit about adjusting glazes and answer questions you may have. The first question is why someone would want to mix their own glaze. Really, it could be you want control. You want to be able to tweak what's going on. The commercially available glazes just aren't doing what you want to do. So you want to have the control to be able to have the desired effect on your pieces, pots, sculptures, whatever that you want. Another reason is availability. Sometimes a manufacturer will discontinue their commercially available glaze, leaving you, the consumer, sad, and that favorite glaze that you always loved is now gone. So, availability. Another one is cost. Sometimes, you just start to look at the cost of commercially produced glazes and end up with cost issues. And you're like, well, I wonder, would it be cheaper if I mixed it myself? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on the material. But so we've got control, availability, cost, and then there's the joy of discovery. And this is where, you could really go as deep into the glaze rabbit hole as you want. It could be as shallow or as deep as you want it to be. For me, I really enjoy finding new things. I love opening that kiln full of glaze test tiles and stuff and seeing what happened during the firing and how the firing, melted all these materials together, formed this glass, and you have, all the chemical interactions that happened in between. So for me, it's largely in the joy of discovery. But also for the control and the adjustability, so I can have the end product on my pieces that I truly want and I trust and I know. So some things to consider. For me, I'm going to just pan this behind me a bit. This is my pantry. And so you can see the different containers. I have everything from large containers to smaller containers. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But, you know, I have space for it. Sometimes people don't have space. So you can have smaller containers like these sorts of containers of your materials. And the illustrious Talenti jar is fabulous for glaze mixing and materials and stuff too. So, back to here. First things first though, safety. When you're mixing glazes, these materials are not the greatest to breathe in. Small particles get in your lungs and cause lots of problems, health problems, and we want to be doing clay things for a really long time. So we're going to talk breathing. We have the P100 mask. And things to know if this is the kind of mask you have. This makes a seal around your face. And when you put it on, you'll want to make sure, I'm going to take it off for a second, but you want to make sure that it seals completely around and there is no air gap, no air can get in or out, and that it goes properly through the filters and whatnot. More on that in a minute. I'll be wearing it for part of this demo. And then you also have the N95 masks. Don't go out and buy these right now. They're in short supply. Medical professionals need them at the moment. So, you know, when we get, you know, when things are better, this is an old N95 mask that I rescued from the garbage. But again, same thing. You want this to seal nicely all the way around so that you can, so that no air gets in or out of the sides. Another thing is some of these materials are also not the best to be absorbed through your skin. So, you know, these are food preparers, gloves. You know, you'll need gloves for, you know, handling some of these materials. The materials I'm going to be handling today are not problematic to be absorbed through your skin. So, you know the toxicity of the elements that you use, things like cobalt, chrome, manganese, heavy metals. You'll want to be wearing gloves for those. You know, you kind of want a nice, well-ventilated space. You don't want to trap lots of particles in a small area if you can help it. So either have a window open, or if you have an air scrubber, you know, not all studios have those, garage door open, things like that. And then last but not least is rinsing all of your stuff. If you don't have a sink in your studio, just get a great big 5-gallon bucket, rinse it in that, and, you know, allow the particles to settle so it doesn't get into your sink, your traps, and things like that, the water supply, septic tanks, or sewer systems. And now, without further ado, we're going to get mixing. So I'm going to move you once, and hopefully this isn't too painful. So we're just going to flip the camera for a minute, and we're going to attach you up here. Did it work? Move you this way. And power. All right. Sorry if that was a little too all right. Did we move? Is everything good? I'm going to check the chat real quick. Everything seems to be working. Hello, hello. Perfect. Excellent. So now we're all stable on looking down now. So some equipment we're going to need to have for this is a scale. This is just a battery operated scale from AWS. I also have a smaller scale from them when I do small amounts of glazing. And if you don't have either of these, you can also use the old-fashioned O-House triple beam scale, which is, you know, this beast. You know, they all work. This one takes a little bit more patience because you have to wait for the balance to, you know, do its thing. But all these scales will do. Other things you'll need are various bowls and trays and things to weigh into. I personally like disposable deli containers. I use the 16-ounce variety because they, you know, they're disposable if need be. You can write on them really well with a Sharpie. They come in 8 ounces, you know, 3 ounces, 16, 32. So as you're getting into bigger and bigger test batches, you can, you know, do that. I like to use these little spatulas for sieving. You will need a sieve. I like these Talisman sieves because they also handily fit right on top of these deli containers. So it fits right in there, so you can, as you're sieving your glaze through, it just sits right there nicely for you. Let's see, another thing you will need is, I use these syringes when I'm doing test batches to measure my water. I weigh my water, and this is for consistency and documentation and everything else. And speaking of documentation, you will need a notebook. I like these lab books. Pages are numbered, lots of margins, big space, hard bound so you don't lose any pages, because my biggest nightmare is losing my notebook or my test notes or anything and having that one perfect glaze that you cannot reproduce. Some optional things are sorry guys. Immersion blender. Some people will say you can immersion blend and not sieve. One of my test tiles that I have yet to reproduce was blended and not sieved, and so I stopped that because I still am trying to get that result back, which is a bummer. But so immersion blenders work, but I like sieves. I think we're getting on to now glaze materials. When you go buy your glaze materials, you'll either start with a recipe that you find online, or you'll play with the recipe that we go into today, or whatever. You'll go to your clay manufacturer or your local clay supplier, and they'll give you a bunch of bags of stuff. You know, this happens to be a mason stain, but you know, you'll just, you know, I open them, and then I always put them in my own well-sealed containers because they stack well, but sometimes they come in and they, you know, are in plastic baggies inside, sometimes not. So this is what you can expect from the clay suppliers, a little, you know, bag of stuff. You know, you can have, you know, different feldspars. This happens to be Custer feldspar. This is, you know, this is OM4 ball clay. You know, there are tons and tons of materials, and you can go really deep into materials and have a bunch of random containers. I like standardized containers for shelf management. I also love Talenti jars for this purpose too. I remove the label and write on it clearly so I know what's inside. And then you will need your test tiles, your little test pieces that you make to test your glazes on. This is one of mine. It is my last name is Wolf, so I put a wolf paw print on the bottom of everything just a, you know, slab cut little thing. And I extrude these guys because I designed this shape because it kind of emulates a bowl. So you have all of the, you know, you'll get all of the vertical reed, you will get a pooling reed, and this is tall enough here to absorb even some of the runniest glazes that I've done before. So I like this shape because it gives me as much information as possible, and it really, you know, it packs well, it packs tightly, and, you know, I do tons and tons of testing, but these scrapbook boxes, so you can see this, you can see all the tiles in there. This box here holds over 50 tiles, so this shape fits well, it stacks well, and it gives me a lot of information bang for my proverbial buck, if you will. Hi, Nikki. Hi, Heather. Okay, cool. Now, we're gonna get into mixing. So I'm gonna put my mask on. If you guys have a hard time hearing me, let me know. I'm gonna try and watch the chat for but since I'm going to be mixing out powders and stuff, I don't want to be breathing it. So let me know if you have trouble hearing what I'm saying. Okay, so the recipe we're going to be playing with today is a recipe I came up with to be as simple of a recipe as possible without, but yet still being a good glaze. Hey, Stevie. So the recipe we're playing with is the following. It is 3 parts 3124, 1 part talc, 1 part kaolin. This is about as simple as you can get while still being a good glaze. And this, and this is the clear here that you're going to get. On B-Mix Cone 5, this does not craze. So you can kind of see it's a nice clear, covers well, behaves well. So let's get started. I'm going to try and leave this in the background so you guys can see it. My name is Andrea Wolf, so I put Andrea Wolf's 311. But I really just wanted a simple glaze that was still a good glaze. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure out our 60 grams. I'm going to do a 100-gram test batch. I'm going to measure out 60 grams of 3124. So to start, I turn my scale on, wait for it to come around. I do this all in grams, so now I zero out or tear the weight of my catch container here. I get my 3124. And this is really as simple as just measuring out 60 grams. Almost there. I try to have it exact, but if I'm within 0.1 of my goal, it should be fine. And sometimes the scale needs a little help reading the 0. There we go. Yes, this is a cone 6 glaze, Julie. Hi, Denise. So, got that. I measured it out, 60 grams of this, and I'm going to be putting it into my deli container. So there's that. And now, like every good cooking show, I have pre-weighed out the other 2 ingredients. This is your talc, and this is your Edgar Plastic Kaolin, or EPK. Let me turn this off to save battery. And so you have your frit, your clay, and your talc. So now, we're going to talk about water. For every 100 grams of for every 100 grams of dry mix, I use 60 milliliters of water, or 60 grams of water by weight. I like to weigh my water because then it's always consistent. Something to know, when we tear out and zero out this container, there's measurements along this syringe. I should probably do it that way. Cooking with Andrea, yeah. So, there's going to be measurements along here. These measurements aren't exactly accurate to the contents. I've tested it. And also, they don't count the water that's in this tip. So, what I do... Can you see this? Okay, no. Let me get the water in the picture. So, what I do is I fill up with some water. I get rid of it, and you can still see there's water in the tip. I put it on the scale with the water in that tip, and I zero it out. So then I pull in, I try to pull in 60, because you'll see. So 60 milliliters of water by volume here is only 57.5 grams of water by weight. So I just like repeatability. It's a little more than that. So I'm going to get rid of some of it. Close enough for me. I need to refresh my computer because I've lost your questions. Okay. So, okay, let me catch up real quick and look at questions. I think we're good. Okay. But yeah, I like to weigh my water because it, you know, and then I squirt it into the dry mix here. Trying not to get dust because dust is bad. And then the most important step here is to walk away and let time help you out. I can walk away for 10 minutes. I can walk away for an hour, and this will be so much easier to sieve and to mix up once I've allowed it to hydrate some. So I'm going to put the lid on it, and we're going to walk away. And I'm going to take my mask off now, since I'm not weighing out dry materials. And handy dandy, earlier, about an hour ago, I made a batch. And so this has been hydrating for about, an hour and a half. And you can already see, can you see this? Like, all of it's all kind of mushy. You can see the clay and the talc and the frit. It's all hydrated nicely, and it just blends really nicely. So I'm going to stir this up real quick. And then we're going to sieve. Can you get me another container, please? So you can see, you can kind of see how there's like little chunkies and globs in here. That's not great. Let me get this out of my way. So now sieving. I use the Talisman 80 mesh sieve to start. Sometimes I will sieve twice, 3 times, but this just makes sure that there's an even distribution of all the particles in every little bit of glaze on your pots. So set this here, and then let me put this in the center of the page, and I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Let's see, is that better? Yeah. I'm gonna zoom in, and then you just dump. And I will ordinarily spend a little more time getting as much out of this original container as possible, but since this is just a demo, I'll do that. And you can still see there's streaks and whatnot, and I stir and I sieve, and you need to make sure that you lift the sieve out of the container a little bit, because I don't know if you can see, there's a little gap right here, to allow the air underneath. So while I sieve here, I'm going to look for questions. Ooh, a cooking show. Yeah. I have a little, yes, I do have an assistant, someone here in case I need an extra set of hands. Great info. Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks, Kathy. Am I off frame? Yeah, zoom out a little bit. There we go. Okay, so, you know, we are just sieving, and this gets tedious, I won't lie, but it really is a good way of making sure that your particle distribution is really even and it is well mixed, and you don't have any little chunkies or weirdnesses or... Yeah, I have a 100 mesh talisman, Denise, and I have an 80 mesh talisman. I love them to pieces, and like, they're a little spendy. They're like $20 to $25 a piece. And, you know, they're a little spendy, but they're worth it. So, they're so worth it. So, any questions so far? I'm trying to make it fairly self-explanatory and simple, but you can see here, like, look, I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. Yeah, let's get this right. So you can see the little particles and chunkies that are in this screen. This is one of the reasons why you're sieving, is to get rid of the uneven bits. So then I scrape out the bottom, and voila, you have your nicely mixed, fairly even consistency of glaze. And this here is this recipe. It will make this lovely clear. Where's my camera? And again, this is on B-Mix Cone 6. Which I fire to about a hot 6, a cool 7. Oops, let's zoom you back out. Oh, it's B-Mix Cone 5. Same difference. Other sieves that I have, and I'll show you guys this again when I zoom out, but we have these sieves that look like this for like full, these will fit into a 5-gallon bucket. These work too. I have that in a 60 mesh and a 80 mesh and the 100 that you just saw. Do I usually only sieve once is the question that I just got from Nikki. And yes, So if I am doing a test of just a clear like this, I will sieve once. If I am doing anything with colorants, I will sieve twice to make sure that the colorant particles are fully distributed in the suspension. And so speaking of suspension a little bit, you can see that this is pretty much the right consistency for dipping. And you can even, I'll throw a test tile in here to show, like, you just do 1, 2, second dip, and really, it coats nicely. You get a nice coverage. It works well. So then, there was another question. So, hold on, I'm finding the question. Is this a new glaze? No, this is this glaze, Kathy, I developed kind of as a teaching tool and also as just a nice, how simple can it be, glaze that is well behaved. So kind of I set out to develop this glaze just kind of as an illustration, but then it's turned out to be a really nice glaze anyway. Another point on water, when I'm mixing my 5-gallon batches of water, scratch that, glaze, 5-gallon batches of glaze, I will use distilled. If I'm testing, I'll use tap just because I'm running through a bunch and getting distilled water is kind of a pain sometimes. So if you want the consistency and the repeatability, you'll use distilled. Like I recently moved a couple years ago to Washington State from California, and all of my glazes got a little funky because the water supply was different. But now, if we go back to what I just mixed, you can already see after 5 minutes how the hydration has helped this. So we're not going to sieve this one through, but just to see how that water is absorbing into those dry materials. Let's see. And now, you know, you can take this glaze and do what I did last night. And I did a full color exploration for you guys to show you the different things that this glaze can be. And I mixed, so this one was from last night that I made. This has 1% cobalt in it. You can't really tell through the dry mix, through the glaze, but it comes out like this. It's a nice transparent, dark blue. This is only 1% cobalt. So cobalt goes blue. We have 0.5% of copper, gets you this really nice light green. If we step that up to 3% copper, you get a darker green yet. And you can kind of tell how these different colorants really really help. The question that just popped up is, where do I get those containers with lids? I get them from Big Lots. I get them from restaurant supply stores. Amazon has them, that kind of thing. And so this one has more copper yet at 5%. And it's this nice deep green that breaks this nice white. For fun, I grabbed a mason stain that I had on the shelf that was red. Clearly, it'll need a little work because it's all bubbly, but this was just kind of a fun and wild test. This is Zircopax. So Zircopax is an opacifier and it goes white. This was 10% Zircopax. And then we have, this is 7%, I'm sorry, of red iron oxide, and it goes this lovely, this is actually one of the reasons why you would sieve it twice. Last night, this was midnight when I was doing this, so you can see all these speckles. If you sieve red iron oxide twice, it'll be less speckly, but it's this nice dark deep brown. We have titanium dioxide, which opacified it just a hair, but not a lot, but it's mostly kind of like a milky clear. This is 5% titanium. We have rutile, which in presence of other things will probably make this feather really nice. If you could get up close on this, you can see there's like slight feathering in the glaze mix. And then we have, now this was the surprise for me of this glaze, was chrome. Chrome. This I was expecting to be something like this. This is a different glaze entirely, but I was expecting a green similar to this. But because chemistry is fun and I love it to pieces, it got this. So I have some homework to do on what about that base recipe made chrome go this like almost purple mauve. It's really kind of cool. And then we have the last two colorants that I did for you guys was manganese, which made it bubble more, which was interesting. And then this one is nickel, black nickel oxide. Yeah, and so I did 2% nickel in this and 5% manganese. And if later you want to try any of these, just message me, and if I neglected to mention it, I will let you know what that was. Is there any? The speckles are kind of nice. What is causing those little bubbles or pits in the little testils? So, in some of them, you'll see, like for example, the mason stain. Like it really, mason stains are fickle creatures because they're encapsulated and they bubble up. So this one is likely the mason stain, and this seems to, when I get up on close on looking at the mason stain one, it looks a hair under fired. So since I don't know what's in the mason stain, it's probably refractory, and it probably wanted to be melted a little bit hotter. In the manganese and the nickel ones, the manganese itself, and the nickel, you can see it's just like the manganese itself, it was probably, as it was still boiling and whatnot, as it was firing, it just didn't have time to clear the bubbles. This was also a super fast firing in my little itty bitty test kiln, so I get a lot more bubbles in that. Cobalt, however, you can see there are fewer bubbles in this, and cobalt is a flux, and so it melted the glaze a little bit more, which allowed the bubbles to clear more. So it's all about the different materials being refractory or being a flux, and so you kind of have to adjust for that when you have your when you have your whole recipe out. You can see how different, like the copper too. The more copper that you get, the more the bubbles cleared. So you have 0.5% with this bubbles, 3% with these bubbles, and then by the time you get to 5, the bubbles are almost gone. So, you know, it's all about the melt and the composition. Let's see. How much rutile? The rutile one, this one was 4% rutile. Usually that's where I start, and the next test I want to do is to put 2 or 3% of copper with this, and it should be pretty fun. I don't know if that really answered your question, Nikki. I tried. Curious after seeing the chrome version, what is in the fridge? Yeah, I'm going to go back to my charts and look at the chemistry a bit further, Denise, because it was very, very interesting, the advice. So, let's see. Another thing when you start to do glaze work is you start to have issues with your glazes. You'll either want to change, you know, the color profile. You'll want to change, your glaze might craze, your glaze might dunt. You want to, you know, try and fix these deformities that have happened in your glazes. And One easy way to do it is to play with different steps. So I'm going to use this copper as an example because it's visual. And just as you start doing glaze mixing, this one actually is 1% copper. So this one fits in right here. But basically, you see me stepping copper up from 0.5% all the way up to 5% over here. And it really, really works well to do what these are called. These are called line blends, you'll see. And it's 0.5%, 3%, 5%. And that way you can see just how the one variable, the copper, moves throughout that space. And so that's, adjusting color. I highly recommend doing some of these blends, saying, okay, well, this one was too light, but I don't want it to get too dark, but I don't really know where too dark is. And you just pick, you go, okay, 0.5%, 1%, 2%, 3%, and you land here. And you go, okay, I want a little darker, then you can go 3%, 4%, 5%, and kind of march your way around the space to learn what you get. And if your glaze is crazing, and which is the little crack, so this little sample here is not this glaze, it's just an example of what crazing is in case you don't know. Can you see? Okay, let me get that to focus. All those little cracks in that glaze. That is generally an undesirable trait. Sometimes people use it for great effect. I try to get rid of it wherever possible, unless I'm doing something completely decorative like this cute little magnet I made. But yeah, so crazing, you generally, you will read online and people will say, oh, line blend silica, or line blend, I find also that line blending talc will help. So if you're playing with this glaze, this 311, and you end up with crazing, my recommendation to you is to play with this talc number and march it up a little, march it down, see what happens. See how it affects your clay body, because this works on my clay body, VMix Cone 5, but it may not work on your clay body. Did you do a hold at the top and a control? If I did a hold at the top and a controlled cooling, would it help with the bubbles? Asks Heather. Possibly. Sometimes a hold at the top does help with bubbles. It allows the clay to stay molten long enough to let these bubbles clear and the pits heal. Sometimes that happens. Controlled cooling may also allow for more time for the bubbles to clear. However, that can also introduce other issues. If you do controlled cooling, you can sometimes end up with crystal growth. So when you have glazes that contain titanium dioxide, for example, it will tend to change in a firing. I have a glaze that has, there's some titanium in it, and it can go from blue, blue, blue to green, like pond scum green. Can you see if you can find examples of, okay, so this is a good example. These are two different clay bodies. So like this glaze here, this is a faster firing. And then this is a slower firing. Looking for a different example. Hand me one of those little cups up there, please. Yeah, that one. So like, again, this will happen when you slow cool glaze with titanium. I was shooting for the blue, but I ended up with kind of it going a little pond scum green on me. So these are the titanium crystals forming inside the glaze as the glaze is cooling. Let's see. So many variables. Yes. Are you firing a Cone 7 with a Cone 5 glaze Cone 5 clay because of your glaze compatibility? No, it's not. I'm not really firing to Cone 7-ish. because of my cone. Wait, let me get that right. A cone 5 clay because of your glaze compatibility. I'm firing this B mix until it is vitrified, until the clay body has turned to a glass. And I use cones. Even in my computer controlled kiln, I will always put in at least one set of cones. I have a cone 5, a cone 6, and a cone 7 here. And this is your, you know, if you haven't been walked through this before, this is your, hey, we're getting close to the temperature, heads up. This is the cone 6 is the, hey, like this is where you want to go and you want this to be, you know, nicely bent around here. And then cone 7 is, hey, you know, you're going to overshoot if this goes down too much. And so these little buttons were, I just had it. There it is. So these little, this is a cone 6. So this was a hot cone 6. I fire my B mix until I have a really low absorption rate and vitrification. Glaze is so hard. Yeah, it's, you know, it's as hard as you want it to be, Elaine. It can be super simple and it can be super duper complex. You know, it just depends on how far down the rabbit hole you go. Mary wants to know, how do you fire bisque? I fire my bisque to cone 04. Because, you know, I've had, at one point I had glaze issues and I was working on choosing a bisque that worked really well for me and my glazes, and cone 04 was my sweet spot for my application style and my glazes and stuff. So I like cone 04. But yeah, no, let's see. Yeah. Back to the cone 7 with the cone 5 clay. So a lot of the cone 6 clays that you see on the market are more of a range than an actual temperature. It ends up being that these cone 6 clays, you know, cone 6 or cone 5, kind of aren't really cone 6 or cone 5. They're usually a little bit, you know, when you want to get them super vitrified, and super, a nice tight firing, more glassy, more ringy when you, actually hand me a bowl. A really glassy one right there. Thank you. Yeah. So like, I'm really shooting for, like, you know, super duper smooth and glassy. I don't know if you can see this, but it's super, almost has a sheen to it when it comes out of the kiln. But like, you know, it rings really nicely, but if it were fired lower, it wouldn't ring quite as well. Matrix, hold on. Did you have a question, Justin? Matrix. What did you do? I'm going back and looking for questions that I missed. If I missed a question, I'm experimenting with Laguna clay now, using local clay branded mugs, leaks at cone 6. Exactly, Elaine, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And the fact that it leaks is probably because your glaze has some small craze lines in it, and that your clay body isn't fully vitrified. So you'll end up with liquid getting into the body of the clay. Let's see. Another thing you can do to test for vitrification is you can fill up whatever your vessel is with water to the top, and you put a tissue underneath it and let it sit overnight, or a piece of paper towel, or a piece of printer paper, just regular old printer paper. And if in the morning it's all crinkly, you will know that you're not fully vitrified. So for now, what I'm gonna do is flip the camera. Tight clay body matrix. Yes, exactly. Laguna B-Mix has never leaked for me, even at Cone 5. I've not had problems with Laguna B-Mix either, Stacy. So, exactly. So, that's kind of what that is all about. I've always liked B-Mix because it's always been really nice and glassy, and it's always had a really good color response in my glaze. Are there any other questions about like the mechanics of the mixing of the glaze while I have the camera in this orientation? I'll wait just a couple seconds to let some questions, because I know there's about a 30-second lag here. All right, I'm gonna switch you guys back to the other vantage real quick, because you're just looking at my hands. Switch. All right. Okay, so crazing. We'll talk a bit about this. Came in late. Thank you. All right, so crazing. That is back to this tile here. The glare of the light. There we go. So you can kind of see the craze lines on this here. It really is suboptimal, but you know, some people use it for visual effect on different things. Things you can do to address crazing if you're trying to get it to stop is up your silica content and up your talc if you have talc in the glaze. Now, silica will stiffen your glaze melt a little bit. It will change the expansion. You'll hear this term coefficient of thermal expansion. And it's just a fancy way of saying kind of like shrinkage rate, more or less. And you want, as the clay and the glaze come together in the fire and you hit the peak and everything's as soft and wibbly wobbly and runny as it gets, as things shrink in, you want them to, at the end of the day, you want them to have shrank the same amount. You want it so that the clay and the glaze shrinkage rates are compatible with each other, because if it doesn't, if the clay breaks the glaze, you'll end up with crazing. That light behind me is killer. Can't really see that, but and if you, that's a little better. So if clay breaks the glaze, you'll get crazing. Or like this. You can kind of see the crazing here. This is the clay that's breaking the glaze. And then you can have the glaze break the clay, which is called dunting. And that's all kinds of fun. I had a friend of mine who made these mugs that they dunted, but it was like a delayed dunting. So like he would be in his classroom and randomly his mug would explode. And he happened to use one once for coffee, and he ended up with coffee all over his lap because he had a mug that dunted on him. Also not great. But in that case, if you have something that is dunting, you want to back off on the silica or the talc, and if you have it crazing, you want to up it a little bit. And this is like before you get too deep into the glaze chemistry world. I'm trying to kind of give you guys a bit of a foundation to work from that isn't too crazy sciencey. I have to go back to the beginning and see if you talked about ingredients. I did talk about ingredients just a little bit, Vanessa. In this glaze, where did they go? I just used, you'll see, I used 3124, which is a ferrofrit 3124. I used Edgar Plastic Kaolin, EPK, and I used talc. Let me grab that. Boom, talc. So if I'm experiencing crazing on my standard 240 body with clear glaze, I should adjust up them the talc and silica, looking for a clear glaze that does not craze. Susan, I would try this glaze on that, honestly. So this This is the glaze that we just mixed up today. I would try this. It seems to, so far I've had pretty good success with it. And then there are some times when you'll be sitting in your studio or your house and you'll hear ping. Every potter's my worst nightmare. I hate that noise. And so crazing can happen delayed. You can take things out of the kiln, you can use them for a month, and it still won't craze. And then all of a sudden, pink, 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 pink. And, you know, that just means you're really close to that good fit. You're super close, so the adjustment just needs to be super minor. But it may not happen immediately. And it doesn't have anything to do with the cooling rate of your kiln. You will end up with, if something's gonna craze, it will craze. It can craze right when you take it out of the kiln. It can craze 3 months later. I have a glaze that I'm developing right now that it took, how long did it take for that thing to craze? I think 2 months or so. Like, we were just using it. Yeah. This one has yet to craze in a year-ish. So this one I'm pretty, you know, pretty sure it won't craze. We'll see. Time will tell. Let's see. What cone for clear? This is a cone 6. Yeah, Susan, let me know how this works, and if you need help, I can help you. Just message me or friend me on Facebook, and I'll help you dial it in. Let's see. If I have crazing issues, does the small test tile tell you crazing, or I have to make bigger test tiles or a mug? Elaine, yes, sometimes this test tile won't tell me everything. Sometimes I have to use a tile that is a flat disc, like this. So like I'm really, you know, I'll use a flat disc to read bubbles and crazing and stuff. This will tell me a lot how it will perform on a vessel. And then when I'm pretty sure I like how things are going, I will graduate to a small shot glass. So you can kind of see this real juicy blue I'm working on. Fun glaze, right? But yeah, this one hasn't crazed yet either. So you can see that really nice thick spot, and this has not crazed yet. But yeah, you know, I'll graduate it to a small shot glass. So I'll go from here to here in like small, like under 500 gram increments on my testing. And then from here, I'll graduate to a 1 gallon bucket, which is about 1 to 2 kilogram batch of glaze. And then from there, once I've used most of that, I'll graduate it to a 3 gallon and a 5 gallon, which is, you know, 5 kilograms and 10 kilograms respectively, like to just kind of up however confident I am in my glaze recipe, I will just up it to the size, because I have, you know, glaze tests everything from, you know, this little guy of just, this is only a 50 gram batch, to what we did today, which is a 100 gram batch, and then I'll go, you know, up from there. Can I ask what you're firing on so that the bead of glaze on the bottom didn't hit your shelf? Hand me the small kiln shelf, please. I use kiln wash on all of my shelves. And you can kind of see, like this particular kiln wash I need to redo, but you can see this like little chunk that came out. This was where a bit of glaze stuck, and I just, you know, I knocked it off or whatever. But then what I will do is I will go outside when it's a nice day. I live in Seattle. There aren't many of those. Scrape these down, re-kiln wash. There's a great Ceramic Arts Network article on kiln wash where they go through a bunch of different recipes and stuff. If you ask me after this and like message me, I'll send you a link to the article. Also, what I'll do is after I'm done and this kind of like kissed the kiln shelf or whatever, I don't know if you can see. You can kind of see how it's a little bit rough. I will sand it using diamond sanding pads to pull off the kiln wash and polish the surface back to a glossy clear sheen. Diane, oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad this was helpful. Can I ask what you're firing on? Corey, hit me up. I'll send you the link for the kiln wash. What you're firing, wait. On your shot glass, yeah. let me know. Send me a message and I will, I have a jug of commercial glaze, I think Amico, it has settled. I read where if I add Epsom salt, that will help it. Dissolve Epsom salt into water until no more, and then add 2 tablespoons to fix the glaze. Any advice on this? Yeah, the Epsom salt will help. But what I would do first is I would take all the water off of the top. Hold on a second. He's grabbing me something. Thank you. Thank you. So fancy dancy. When I moved here, all of my glazes settled, which for me is a thing because I care about suspension in my glazes, and so all of my glazes really suspend well. So 2 days in a moving truck, like settled, hard pan settled all of my glazes. And I could spend another hour talking about glaze suspension in the water column and all of that, and flocculation and deflocculation, but that's another talk, and I'm running up against time. So long story short, here's the trick. Pour off the water, set it aside, don't get rid of it. Grab yourself one of these tools and scrape up all the glaze particles out of the bucket. Like really just go to town and like loosen it all up until it's all kind of like chunky and whatnot. Then I would slowly start adding water back in and use your drill bit blender. Okay, so hold on. Let me flip the camera real quick for you. I'm sorry, there's my assistant. Say hi. So you would use either that drill bit or that drill bit, one of those two, to really loosen it up. And to get it back integrated before you start adding Epsom salt. Just adding Epsom salts into the water won't magically dissolve and resuspend your particles. Because what's happened is they've all settled down to the bottom and they're kind of locked there. So you need to unlock them mechanically first. And then you can see once you add the water back in where your suspension sits. If that's helpful. Also, if you don't have, you may want to, sometimes bentonite helps, yes, to suspend the glazes. Sometimes it just makes you more of a gloopy mess. So what I try to do is make sure that I have the proper clay content in the glaze formula itself first. And then if I need a little boost, I'll add a smidge of bentonite. But when it comes to mixing bentonite, it goes gloopy and clumpy so fast. I try to only use it when absolutely necessary, when I'm sure I want this particular formula and I just need a little help. Does delayed crazing and dunting make you anxious about selling your wares? Yes, Eileen, it really does. I kind of take great responsibility in having a really nice durable glaze surface on my pottery. I try not to have glaze crazing. I try not to have glaze dunting. And this is one of the reasons why I go down the rabbit hole of glaze development to begin with, is so that I know what's in it. I know how it's going to behave, and I am confident in how it will behave for the long term. You know, I use my stuff in my kitchen. I make sure to run it through the dishwasher and the microwave to do all the testing I can to try and be as confident in my product as possible, if that's helpful. Hi, assistant. Any tips about using zinc oxide? Yes, actually, I do. Zinc oxide, so organized. Thanks, Ken. I really try. I'm kind of a nut when it comes to organization. But so zinc oxide. I make a zinc oxide milkshake. I will take, because my zinc oxide is clumpy, and for people who haven't, where is my zinc oxide? Okay, so for people who haven't seen it, this is zinc oxide. It is clumpy, it is lumpy, and it doesn't like to mix into glazes. So what I will do, it's hard to do this with test batches, but I will get my blender or my immersion blender, and I will get part of the water weight that I know I'm going to be using in the glaze anyway, and I will run it through the blender first to get it all mixed into get it in its own little slurry and dump it back into the mix. You are awesome. Thanks for sharing. Oh, thank you for being here, Elena. I appreciate that. Diane, you're welcome. If you don't, Hi, Gabe. This is not a cone 10 glaze, guys. This is, oh, is Diane, it's cone 10? Yeah, you know, my advice still stands for a cone 10 glaze over a cone 6 glaze, Diane. So just mechanically mix it up, and then you can add Epsom salts from there. If you want to send me some pictures of what it looks like, I can probably give you better advice from there. Let's see. I know I'm about, hold on a second, one more new comment. Such a helpful lecture. Thank you. You're welcome, Susan. I know I'm running out of time. I have one more thing that I forgot because it's got tucked under a piece of paper. All of my test tiles are labeled with a number. You can see numbers. And I like to use the Amico underglaze pencil for writing on the bottom. And I also stamp it with the clay body it is when I extrude my tiles. And then my number goes in my notebook. And so I can basically, I have a firing log and a glaze notebook. And so from my firing log, I can find what firing this was in on what day with what glaze formula. I can back it all out because one of my big things is I always, if someone has something of mine and it breaks, I always want to back it out to be able to be like, oh, I bought this at this show and I really love it and it fell and it broke and I'm so sad. I want to be able to recreate that for that person if I can, if it's possible. So, document, and always write down what you're doing, when you're doing it, that kind of thing. You've made such a clear, oh, thank you, Eileen. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much for, oh, you're welcome. Stacy says, hi, Gabe. Yeah, and I'm running out of time here, so I don't know what the next presentation is off the top of my head. So if there's not any further questions, what do you normally fire to? I do high fire oxide, but try glazes that can take that heat by finding good ones. Test lots and appreciate your tips. Kristen, I normally fire a toasty cone 6, pretty hot. I use B-Mix cone 5 for that, and these glazes are mine that I make. As far as higher heat, it would be the same thing. That's where I learned. I learned in a cone 10 reduction environment, and you really you find recipes and you kind of riff off of them. By the time I'm done and using a glaze, I've riffed off of the recipe enough that it's pretty far from my original recipe that I started with. Really, like, there's a bunch of good books out there. And, you can start, message me, and I can send you some more information. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Stacy, for putting this whole thing together. And again, if you have any more questions, I'll be watching this video, and when it's up, I'll try and answer questions as I can. I hope you guys all have a great night, and enjoy the rest of the presentations. Bye, guys.